The Academy gave Best Picture to Shakespeare in Love but ignored The Searchers. It snubbed Sergio Leone, blacklisted Sam Peckinpah, and let John Ford walk away empty-handed. These are the 10 times Hollywood looked the greatest westerns ever made straight in the eye, then walked the hell away. This one is straight up baffling. Rio Bravo is now considered one of the greatest westerns of all time, and the Academy just looked the other way. Howard Hawks hadn't made a movie in 4 years when he took this one on. His last film, Land of the Pharaohs, had bombed. He thought maybe he was done. On the first day of Rio Bravo, he was so nervous, he threw up behind the set before calling action, and then he walked out and directed a masterpiece. John Wayne plays Sheriff John T. Chance, holding a dangerous prisoner in jail while waiting for the U.S. Marshal to arrive. He's got help from a washed-up drunk, a young hotshot with a guitar, and a grizzled old deputy. They're outnumbered, outgunned, and completely boxed in. Rio Bravo came out the same year as Ben-Hur and Some Like It Hot, so it got completely overshadowed at the Oscars. No nominations, no wins, nothing. Since then, it's been added to the National Film Registry, preserved for its cultural significance. Tarantino's even said it's his favorite Western of all time, #1 on his list. And Roger Ebert said watching it was like seeing a master at work, but the Academy just ignored it. The Wild Bunch is Sam Peckinpah's bloody farewell to the Old West. Set in 1913, it follows a gang of aging outlaws as they try to pull off one last job in Mexico. They're up against corrupt railroad men, double crosses, and the creeping realization that their time is up. The modern world is swallowing them whole. This thing caused walkouts. At one screening, nuns literally ran out of the theater. A viewer got so mad they wrote a complaint to their congressman, and during a press conference, a critic from Reader's Digest straight up asked why this movie was even made. Roger Ebert said it was the most violent movie ever made at that point, and he wasn't wrong. People get shot, stabbed, dragged, strangled, horses go down, blood explodes everywhere. But Ebert still called it a very good Western with excellent performances and said the violence gave audiences something to confront in themselves. The Academy gave it 2 nominations, Best Screenplay and Best Original Score, but no wins. That's all it got. A film that changed the genre forever, that influenced everything from Scorsese to Tarantino, and they couldn't even toss it a statue. This is one of those quiet, low-budget westerns that absolutely nails everything it sets out to do. Van Heflin plays Dan Evans, a struggling rancher who agrees to guard a captured outlaw, Ben Wade, for a couple $100. He's supposed to get him on a train to Contention City, but the longer they travel, the more complicated things get. The outlaw's charming, the threats are constant, and Evans starts to respect the very man he's supposed to deliver to justice. It's a stripped-down setup, basically one man up against everything, and it just works. You've got these morally gray characters, a brutal desert landscape that feels like its own character, and a story that pushes both men to their limits. Glenn Ford and Van Heflin are incredible in it. The Academy ignored it. Completely. Not a single nomination in 1958. It ended up being one of the key films that pushed Howard Hawks to make Rio Bravo, because he thought movies were getting too bleak and cynical. That was his reaction to 3:10 to Yuma and High Noon, both seen as too revisionist at the time. Sergio Leone went his entire career without a single Oscar nomination, not one. And that includes Once Upon a Time in the West, which might just be his greatest achievement. The story takes place in the town of Flagstone, where a greedy rail baron is trying to muscle his way into controlling the region. He sends an outlaw to handle it, played by Henry Fonda, completely flipping his nice guy image, and that sets off a chain of violence, revenge, and one very determined harmonica-playing stranger. Leone is obviously best known for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but this Western is the one that directors really point to. Scorsese put it on his list of the best widescreen films ever made. And Tarantino, this is the movie that made him want to become a director. He said it flat out. This was the film that showed him what directing actually was. Red River is one of the most respected Westerns ever made, but it somehow walked away with only 2 Oscar nominations, and not in any of the major categories. Directed by Howard Hawks, It stars John Wayne as a hard-driving cattle rancher leading a massive cattle drive from Texas to Missouri. His adopted son, played by Montgomery Clift, ends up challenging him along the way. It's a father-son power struggle set against the backdrop of the American frontier, and it's brutal in all the right ways. But behind the scenes, things weren't so great. Clift hated the final product. He thought his performance was mediocre. He hated the watered-down ending, and he couldn't stand that the central conflict just fizzled out at the end. Still, Wayne delivers one of the most complex performances of his entire career. He's not a hero here. He's obsessive, angry, and deeply flawed. The film digs into character psychology in a way a lot of westerns didn't at the time. Roger Ebert called Red River one of the greatest westerns ever made, especially when it sticks to its core story about that generational clash. And yet the Academy gave it nominations for Best Film Editing and Best Motion Picture Story. That's it, Hawks didn't even get a mention. The Searchers is one of the most influential westerns in film history. Everybody from Spielberg to Scorsese has praised it, and John Ford, who directed it, was already considered one of the greats. The film follows Ethan Edwards, a Civil War veteran played by John Wayne, who returns home and ends up spending years tracking down his kidnapped niece. But the further he goes, the more we see that this isn't just a rescue mission, it's an obsession. Ethan's motivations get darker, more complicated, and by the end, you're not even sure what he's really capable of. Cinematographer Wynton C. Hoch took Monument Valley and turned it into something mythic. The scale, the light, the composition, everything feels huge, but also very real. This is probably the most beautiful film John Ford ever made. And somehow the Academy just ignored it. No major nominations. Nothing for Best Picture, nothing for Ford, nothing for Wayne. Over time, critics have re-evaluated it, and now it's considered a landmark, but at the time, total snub. It's hard to imagine now, but when Sergio Leone was making the Dollars trilogy, nobody thought it was going to be iconic. Clint Eastwood was still trying to prove himself after Rawhide, and Hollywood barely took him seriously. They weren't even sure people would pay to watch a guy they could see for free on TV. The budgets were microscopic. Fistful of Dollars was made for $200 grand, which meant Leone had to shoot scenes silent and fill them in later with sound effects and music. That's one reason the dialogue is so minimal. Just get the image, fix it later. Even Leone himself had to go by a fake name. He was credited as Bob Robertson in early US prints. But the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's where it all came together. Leone took every single thing that worked in the first two films and just leveled it up. Bigger budget, more complex story, real grit and weight. That Morricone score? Untouchable. And with Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, and Eli Wallach, you've got 3 all-time performances in one movie. Roger Ebert once said Leone built a masterpiece out of the trash pile of Western cliches, and he's right. But the Academy didn't give it anything. No nominations, no recognition. One of the most influential films ever made, and they pretended it didn't exist. The Misfits was Marilyn Monroe's best performance. It was also her last. Same with Clark Gable. It's not a typical Western. It doesn't have shootouts or saloon brawls, but it's absolutely part of the genre, and it deserves to be there. Monroe plays Rosalind, a woman drifting through the desert, drinking too much, tangled up with broken men who don't know what to do with her tenderness. It's raw and it's real, and it hit way too close to home for her. By the time filming started, her marriage to Arthur Miller was falling apart. She was exhausted, hospitalized more than once, and battling depression. Her co-star Montgomery Clift wasn't doing much better. And Gable, well, he gave everything he had. He insisted on doing his own stunts in the heat of the Nevada desert, even though he wasn't in good health. 10 days after they wrapped, he died of a heart attack. He never even got to see the final cut. But before he passed, he said it was the best acting he ever did. And none of that got recognized. Monroe wasn't nominated. Houston's direction was ignored. The film tanked at the box office, cost $4 million to make, brought in just over $4.1 million. Years later, critics came around, but at the time, the Academy gave it nothing. This is John Ford in full poetic mode. You've got Henry Fonda as Wyatt Earp, showing up in Tombstone trying to bring order to the chaos. One of his brothers gets killed, cattle stolen, and instead of going full revenge mode, Earp takes the sheriff's badge and tries to clean up the town. That all leads straight to the OK Corral. But Ford's more interested in what makes a hero than in the violence. The romance with Clementine, the quiet reflection, the way Fonda plays Earp as this calm, steady presence. It's just beautiful filmmaking. Critics loved it at the time. Some called it confident and canny, others praised the way Ford captured the mood and feeling of the West. Roger Ebert once wrote that this might be one of the most good-hearted westerns ever made, and he's right. The giveaway is in the title. It's not about the shootouts, it's about Clementine. And still, no Oscar for Fonda, no Oscar for Walter Brennan, no Oscar for Ford. One of the greatest westerns of the 1940s, and the Academy just ignored it. The Coen brothers remade True Grit, and they knocked it out of the park. This wasn't just a gritty modern update, it was a full-on love letter to the original novel by Charles Portis with that signature Coen brothers twist. You've got Haley Steinfeld, 14 years old, just completely owning the screen. Jeff Bridges playing Rooster Cogburn with that gravelly voice and worn-down swagger. Matt Damon, Josh Brolin, every single one of them locked in. And it looked stunning. That winter landscape, the way it was shot, it just feels cold and dangerous. You can practically smell the gunpowder. The Academy noticed. They gave it 10 nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Cinematography, Sound, Editing, the whole deal. And then something ridiculous happened. It didn't win a single thing. 10 nominations, 0 wins. One of the best westerns of the 21st century, and it walked away empty-handed. One of the biggest Oscar snubs in recent memory.